I want to sort of chat a little bit today about code assistant tooling and actually how we use that in production for real code that runs kind of real business processes and not just kind of throwaway demos. So how do we use those tools in production? I guess before we sort of kick off, a quick bit about myself. So I'm Matt Belcher. I sort of head up emerging tech for Codurance in the UK. So a lot of work over the past sort of year or so around AI, quite a lot, helping organisations kind of understand and sort of cut through the hype, but also trying to adopt AI tools and AI services kind of in their workflows. A little quick bit about Codurance as well. So we're a consultancy with the values of sort of software craftsmanship and XP kind of at our heart. And we're all about really sort of trying to kind of raise the bar of software quality kind of in the industry. Then as Sam quite nicely said, we also have, we were born out of the London software craftsmanship community back in 2010. It's still going strong, sort of 15 years later. I think it's about 6,000 members now in total, so we're a really good community, full of like-minded folks that really care about building software and kind of building it in the right way. Right, so I guess let's sort of jump into it then. So this term kind of vibe coding has been kind of used quite a lot over the past few months. Who sort of have a guess or kind of shout out what they think vibe coding actually means before we sort of dig into it. So what does vibe coding mean to anyone? Kind of shout out, raise your hand. Anyone want to have a go? What's that?
Slot code.
Slot code, okay, yeah. Anyone else?
Vibing with the AI, I mean, just prompting.
Prompting, yeah, okay.
Not caring about quality.
Not caring about quality, yeah, okay. So some good.
YOLO.
YOLO, yeah, okay. So in fact, it kind of came from this tweet back in February. So one of the co-founders of OpenAI back in February, so not long ago, but it's become quite a mainstream term already. It's quite a long tweet, but like the first sentence said, there's a new kind of coding I call vibe coding, where you fully give into the vibes, embrace exponentials and forget that the code even exists, so on and so forth. So there's quite a long tweet there, but in effect, what he's basically saying is kind of, I'm giving over everything, giving over control and power to the AI tooling and the LLMs. I'm letting them run with it really, and so seeing what comes back. I think that can be quite useful, right? That definitely has some use cases, and let's have a quick chat about that in a second. But also, I think there's some times when that approach isn't great either. So I think it's about both sides. But in terms of, I think, kind of like vibe coding and like where it really excels, in my experience so far, like these are sort of the patterns where like vibe coding kind of works really well. So rapid prototype. So for example, within Codurance, we've seen some really good successes with building quite rapid prototype tools with a vibe coding approach. So in fact, some of our colleagues who are even non-technical or less technical, they've been able to build very quick applications to sort of demo an idea or a showcase or a new feature. So that's a kind of a use case that it's very good at, sort of discovery, sort of technical SPIACs investigations, those sort of scaffolding code, if you like, around applications and kind of boilerplate code. They're sort of the situations where I think kind of that vibe coding approach can work well. But I think if you look at all of those sort of scenarios and situations, they tend to all kind of share a few sort of common traits, I think, that are interesting. So the code generally has quite a short lifespan in all those situations. You're caring more about speed. So I want to build something very quickly to kind of prove an idea or work out what I should do next, or where should I invest my time next, or is this worth investing further, or so forth, so on and so forth. And generally, like the functionality that you're building, so you want to see this feature, that tends to kind of outweigh the code quality, right? So I think someone mentioned before about code slop. With kind of a vibe coding approach, actually that's probably okay because you don't really care about the code quality. You care about is this feature demoable? Is it going to work in practice? Is my idea feasible? Those kind of things. But I think crucially, in all of those cases on the previous slide, the code's not going to run in production, right? So it's not code that's going to support some really key critical business process. It's not customer facing, all those kinds of things. So I think that's a really critical piece to kind of have a think about. So if you kind of go back then to talking about vibe coding and perhaps why it's not so great for production, I've gone back to the same tweet. It's kind of, there's a few parts of that I thought were kind of worth highlighting a little bit. So I'm just going to read through a few here. So forget the code even exists. Accept all always. I don't even read the diffs anymore. The code grows beyond my usual comprehension. Great for kind of throw-in weekend projects, and finally, like, it mostly works. So like none of those things to me kind of sound like that's how you should be treating production code, right? And kind of hope that that's also not how you're treating your production code. But I think then a lot of people that I speak to kind of equate AI coding tooling and AI code assistance with kind of vibe coding. I think they're two separate things, right? I think we can still use AI coding tooling and AI code assistance tools for production code, but we have to do it in the right way. Vibe coding doesn't mean that we have to follow that approach if we're using AI coding tooling. But thinking about most of our jobs as developers, and we're building code that's running in production, we kind of want a bunch of qualities from that code, right? We want it to be well understood, for example. So we can reason about the code that's coming back and understand it. We want it to be well designed for some reason. So we want to understand, is this design aligned to my business goals and my overall architecture? Is it evolving in the right way? Is the code scalable? So if I go into new markets, is the code going to still hold up? If I add more users and more traffic, is the code going to still be performant? Maintainable, so production code lasts for many years as opposed to weeks or months, and so being able to maintain the code over time is very, very important, because here you're requiring changing that code over and over again. So that's a key feature. Of course, testable as well. So we want to be able to test the code and make sure that it's surrounded by safety nets that we can change it safely. Of course, secure is obviously really important. We saw a lot recently in the retail space what can happen, if the code's not secure, and of course performance, and a bunch of other quality metrics there. So code quality is really key and really important for writing and maintaining production code. And so this kind of idea of vibe coding doesn't really fit with any of these things, right? It doesn't really kind of match the criteria that we need for production code. So how can we use these tools, these AI code assistance tools? How can we use them for production code? If it's not vibe coding, then what's the approach? How do we use these tools? And so at Codurance, we've been using these tools now on like real-world production systems, real-world code. We've been leveraging tools like Cursor and GitHub Copilot and Claude Code and those kind of things. But we've been doing it in a way that kind of following certain principles and certain patterns that govern how we interact with these tools. And so I'll talk a little bit about kind of what that looks like. But kind of at a high level, how do we try to embed these tools into how we work with production code? And I think there's sort of two main bits to it, right? It's like kind of combining the benefit and the power of these kind of AI coding tools, but also not losing sight of the good kind of fundamentals of good software engineering that we all know and love. And kind of doing it in a way that's a disciplined approach to how we kind of interact with the LLMs and the coding tools. And so we kind of have a bunch of principles in terms of how our teams adopt AI tooling on client projects. I'm going to talk through, is that 5? Yeah, 5 principles today. There's many more, but I'll just talk through 5 today. In terms of like what's guiding us for using these tools in like production, real world systems that are supporting customer traffic and customer businesses. The first one is kind of maintaining ownership and control of the design. So the name of these tools are AI code assistants, right? And so it's important that they remain as assistants and they don't take control of the code. So you really think it's important to have that kind of human in the loop approach for how we use these tools. I think particularly if you're using like agentic modes in Cursor or Copilot, it's all too easy to lose control quite quickly because the amount of code that these agentic features can churn out is massive, right? And if you're not, it all looks quite plausible, but the amount of load that puts on you to understand like code all in one go is quite a lot. And so we tend to prefer having quite a strong human in the loop approach where we're analyzing and reviewing the output that's coming back from these tools and just kind of making sure that, yeah, that's still kind of going in the right direction for our code base and their architecture, or actually that's good, but it's not quite there. Let's kind of refine that a little bit. So making sure we get that in there and making sure that we as developers are still sort of driving the bus in terms of the overall design and the development of the code. The other one I think is a big one, which is prompt engineering. I think that's is already quite an important skill. I think this will be a critical skill, I think, for software development going forward. I think the way in which we as developers kind of interact with LLMs is going to be, I think, a critical skill that I think all of us will need to kind of really hone and develop over time. And so it's things like one-shot prompting, few-shot prompting, where we're giving examples in the prompts that we're passing to the LLMs, but also like refining the way in which we interact and being quite precise about what we want to come back from the LLMs. I think it'd be really, really important. So I like things like breaking down tasks into smaller tasks. I think so it's very easy to give quite vague and high level prompt to your LLM. I think if you do that, yes, you'll get a response back, and yes, that will be a plausible response back. But actually, is that right for your code base? Because what you're doing there is you're opening a large window for the LLM to make assumptions about what's right for you in your code base, and chances are that it won't be making the right trade-offs for your particular situation. So the more guidance you can give in your prompts, and the more examples, whether it's using one-shot or few-shot approaches, I think it all kind of helps in terms of you staying in control, but also like refining the quality of the output that the LLM can provide. I also think where we are seeing it in Codurance is seeing the prompts becoming like artifacts in themselves within the software development process. I think increasingly, like the prompts that we use to interact with the tools, I think they're going to be first-class citizens in themselves. So I think kind of versioning those will be important, kind of sharing those across your team, having them sit either alongside the code base or in a separate repo of themselves. I think will be a common pattern that I think that team will start to do. So I kind of recommend that as an approach that is worth following, kind of versioning the prompts, sharing them across your teams and kind of refining them as you go, but also storing them alongside your code. I think a big one as well for us is trying to measure the impact that we're seeing from the code assistant tool adoption. So like one thing is, yes, we're going to adopt these tools, but actually kind of are they helping us in the right way? So lines of code produced isn't really kind of a meaningful metric, really. Even if you ask a developer, do you feel more productive? And he or she says, yes, that isn't really enough. I think you want to be looking at like applying sort of an approach here around sort of systems thinking. I think about the whole SDLC as a whole. Are these tools actually giving you the benefit and the value that you really need? So are you able to ship changes quicker to your customers, for example? So are you seeing a decrease in lead time? Are you seeing a decrease in change failure rate because the code quality is improved, for example? If you think about SDLC as kind of a system, quite often the software development part of that isn't the bottleneck, right? And so being able to produce code faster by leveraging AI tooling, that might actually kind of highlight pressure points elsewhere in your software development lifecycle that you might need to kind of address either with or without AI tooling. So I think it's really crucial to think about how you're measuring the impact of these tools. So whether that be like the DORA metrics, for example, or some other metric, but the metrics should be, I think, aligned to your business goals and like the wider SDLC system as a whole, not just kind of individual productivity or lines of code. Next one here is kind of, I think, all about experimentation. So I think that we've all seen kind of how fast like, the AI tooling space is moving, right? There's kind of a new tool every half an hour, it seems, which is exciting. But I think also it means that as developers and engineers, we have to kind of be across that. So there's new tools, there's new models as well. I think kind of only recently Claude 4 came out earlier in the year. I think February it was 3.7. So like the gap between them is shortening, it seems. Techniques as well. So we're seeing new techniques emerge around kind of AI development and kind of refining those. So I think all of this means that if we're not careful about kind of how we start to adapt some of these things, it could get a bit like the Wild West, I think, with lots of different tools and techniques kind of flying around. So I think it's important to have a bit of a framework for how you experiment with new tools, whether that be AI code assistance tools or like new kind of AI services or APIs, and then kind of how you progress those from kind of experimentation to something that you want to kind of push forward to and have that as a first-class tool in your organization, or whether you think, no, that's not really kind of adding value for me, I don't want to progress with that. So something along the lines of a tech radar, I think, almost going to be like what's the sort of maturity of this particular tool I'm experimenting with? Is it adding value, yes or no? Is it worth widening the adoption in the organization or not? I think having that sort of provides you with a kind of mechanism then for like how you validate new tools. I think it's important for developers and development teams to have a way of experimenting with these tools, but also you want to experiment in kind of a controlled manner. So I think particularly in the AI tooling space, things are moving so quick. It's important that there's that space and freedom to experiment. Particularly with, I think, the models, that they're improving so quickly that I think it's important to be across that, but I think it's also important to sort of have some governance around that says, okay, yeah, we're confident that this actually is kind of worth pushing now into general use. And then I think finally, the final one here is that we see a lot of sort of customers still sort of trialing like Cursor or Copilot, but using the free tiers or like personal individual licenses. I would say try to avoid doing that. I think it's far better to go with organizational wide licenses. And you might actually say, well, we don't want to tie ourselves in too much with these licenses because the tooling is moving so fast. I would say, okay, well, maybe sort of try kind of a monthly or quarterly license, but still have an organizational wide license, because a lot of benefits to doing that versus having it over kind of individual free tier license. So some of them include, for example, the privacy mode that you can enforce. So yes, as an individual, you can toggle that on and off. So your data is not being used for, not being saved away and potentially used for training later on. At an organization level, you can enforce that that's not happening and be comfortable and confident that no data is going to go to the outside world and is going to be potentially used for training further models. It also means that you can track usage and adoption across your organization and across your teams. There's dashboards that are available for these tools here that show you what people are doing in terms of like their model usage, their interaction with the tool. These are all useful data points, I think, for you to think about. Is the adoption working? Is it adding value? Are people using it? So on and so forth. Then, of course, there's the cost management piece as well. So centralized billing is also an important thing here. I think also, lastly, kind of the integration with your existing system. So security is obviously a really important piece. These organizational-wide setups give you the chance to sort of key into your single sign-on mechanisms and those kind of things. So you get that extra layer of security around some of these things. So definitely worth adopting that approach if you aren't already. That's fine. So a little bit of kind of how what we're seeing right now within Codurance. So I could share a few more, but just to sort of give you three in terms of kind of some of the wins that we've been seeing with using tools like GitHub Copilot and Cursor, but in production by using some of these principles that I talked about today. So it's still leveraging AI coding tooling, but doing it with all these guardrails and principles in place. So, for example, we've been able to see some of our teams have reduced refactoring time by 50%. So auto-generating the code, but doing it by specific refined prompts that enable us to do that faster. We had one project where they were migrating their front-end framework to another one. The work was kind of estimated as being several weeks worth of work. We leveraged, I think Cursor did this piece of work, and the team did it safely and securely in a number of days. So it just shows you the power of these tools and also using them in kind of a controlled and principled way. Then the very end one there is we had a client where they had a very large, complex code base that hadn't been written test-driven from the outset. So there was lots of code that wasn't covered by tests. And adding tests for code that wasn't tested is often quite a difficult thing to do, quite a complex thing to do, and quite time-consuming. But they wanted to change this code, but have a safety net of tests around it. So the team leveraged kind of AI tooling to add a suite of tests around some of this code before being able to make changes to it. And we did that with AI tooling and increased the test coverage by 30%. So again, just kind of three examples. I could share a lot more, but just kind of shows you that by using these AI coding tools in production, combining them with good governance and principles, you can see, I think, some quite good wins here. So it's not all about vibe coding. I think you can still get some good successes by using them in the right way. So I guess to kind of wrap up then a little bit. So I think vibe coding, it has sort of dominated a lot of the airspace, I think, over the past couple of months or so. I think there's lots of different interpretations people have of kind of vibe coding, and I think people often kind of equate vibe coding as being using AI tooling. I think they are very different, as the tweet hopefully kind of pointed out. And vibe coding does have some valid use cases, I think. Prototyping, discovery work, technical spikes, those kind of things. But for me, at least, kind of vibe coding, that's not something that you should use in production. I think for thinking about how you then adopt these tools on enterprise production grade code, it's thinking about making sure that you have a clear set of principles that guide your adoption. So your team should know what are the use cases that I would want to use these tools for, like what types of features should I be using, when might I use, for example, agentic features versus non-agentic features. What are some of the principles that we want to follow around like prompt engineering and how we're going to be sharing the prompts, those sorts of things. I think also like it's going back to some of the fundamentals, I think, and not losing sight of the fact that we learn to get good at writing software through some of these kind of fundamental software engineering principles. I think AI doesn't kind of invalidate those. If anything else, it kind of makes them even more important, I think. So good design is really key, testable code, all these good things. But I think we still want to leverage the AI tooling, but we want to do it in a way that doesn't compromise the good software design fundamentals. And then I shared, I think, 4 or 5 things that we're doing within Codurance. So maintaining control over the code that's generated, making sure that you're the one driving the bus as a developer and it's not the AI kind of taking over. I do think it is worth kind of heavily investing in prompt engineering as a skill, as a practice within your teams. Getting good at that, I think, will be really, really powerful. And having those prompts become kind of first-class citizens within your teams, I think will be a very valuable and kind of beneficial thing to do. Thinking about the overall impact, so not just kind of adopting them for adoption's sake, but actually kind of are you adopting them and seeing the value that you expect to get from these tools? Is it kind of improving the overall software development lifecycle as a whole? Are you seeing lead times for changes decrease? Are you seeing code quality get better? Those kinds of things. And then finally, kind of, I think it's really important also along with the AI tooling to have that experimentation culture. So giving your teams the space to try on new tools or new AI models as they come out, get a good sense of what's worth kind of promoting from experiment to general use, which things aren't, but doing that in a safe and controlled way and having kind of guardrails around how experiments then kind of progress into general use. Just one more thing. So we are about to kind of publish a kind of fuller report on this. I think that should land next week. Keep an eye on that website there. But there's a kind of fuller report that we're going to publish around AI code adoption for production. So I shared a snippet today, but there's lots more that we're going to go into in terms of those practices and kind of recommendations for your teams on how to use these tools for production. There's lots of material out there in terms of like using AI tooling for POCs and demoware, but I think like there's not that much material on kind of how to use these tools for production. So hopefully that provides you with some useful guidance. I think that's all I have. So yeah, thank you for listening. We have time for questions. Any questions?
I was going to ask, how do you deal with human-in-the-loop fatigue? It's getting sort of like 90% of the time, with the tendencies to sort of go, yeah, and maybe things sort of slip through. So you have a guardrail for those circumstances.
Yeah, I think.
Could you also repeat the question?
So yes, the question was how do we deal with human-in-the-loop fatigue, where I think the change set is so large, you just kind of accept, and all the change coming through from the AI tooling. Yeah, good question. I think the key thing that we tend to try and do is break tasks down into smaller tasks and work with the LLMs on those smaller tasks. So in fact, we often sort of follow a bit of a loop on this one. So we might start with a high-level plan for a piece of work. We'll work with the LLM on defining that plan. So we have prompts that can help us to sort of break down that into set of tasks. And so we'll be kind of doing a few back and forth with the LLM to create that plan. As a human, then we're kind of reviewing that plan, and then we might get, say, 5 or 10 incremental steps, if like, within that plan. And then what we'll do is we'll then kind of go to an act phase where we're working our way incrementally through those smaller steps. So I think that rather than having quite large changes coming from the AI tooling, you're getting much smaller changes. So you're still, I think, driving the bus in terms of like the overall plan, and you're helping, and the AI is helping you with that plan. But you're working in smaller segments. So it's leveraging the AI tooling all the way through, but just doing it, I think, in a slightly more controlled way. I think you were first. Yeah.
What AI tools are you currently using, and do you have any tricks that you managed to figure out that make them more effective, or ways of using them?
So what tools are we using, and do we have any tricks that we've been adopting to make them easier to work with? So I think there's two main ones that we've been using, which is GitHub Copilot and Cursor. We also have a little bit of JetBrains Juni that we're using as well, and some experiments going on with Claude Code. I think in terms of tips and tricks, a lot of it is on the prompting side. So I think kind of investing in refining the prompts that come back. We tend to disable the agentic features for most of our work, not all of it, but most of it. And so that enables us to, I guess, like control the amount of change that comes back at any one time and have a bit more of a smaller change sets that we're working with.
Specific, like a specific prompt that you use to get a certain kind of
Specific prompt.
Yeah, like a specific thing that you work.
I think I can't give you a specific prompt, but I think we've definitely seen benefits in, I think I mentioned it earlier, one shot and few shots prompting. So if you're working on, say, a bit of validation logic, say, rather than just kind of having that as a high-level prompt, we might say, okay, well, here's one example input, and here's what the output should be, and here's another input, and here's what the output should be. So it's almost like kind of like test cases in unit testing, but we're giving it to the AI prompt. So that enables the AI prompt then to be a bit more smarter about the response that comes back. I think if you're using like Cursor, I think leveraging Cursor rules is also very good, because that can sort of do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of making sure that the response that comes back from the tool is aligning to your coding practices and your coding styles. I think a lot of it tends to come with the prompting techniques, I think, as opposed to like specifics, if that makes sense.
Still on the prompt engineering slide, the question is, what kind of prompts would you recommend to versioning rather than not?
So the question was, what kind of prompts do we recommend for versioning?
You mentioned that in the slide, like.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So, good question. I think how I sort of see kind of prompts evolving is I think they'll be as valuable, if not more valuable, than the code that gets produced. In some ways, and so I think the code that I mentioned like the plan before. I think taking a user story and kind of how we plan that, not for the specific story, but the structure. I think that sort of like prompt templates almost, if you heard that phrase. The prompt template, I think, is something that I would be looking to version control, because that's something that's quite reusable, whereas not so much the specifics of an individual prompt for a particular situation. I think the templates are things that you want to focus on versioning the most. Now, there might be a situation where a specific prompt for a specific situation is really useful, and you're seeing that come up over and over again. I'm thinking things like, so we do quite a lot of work where we're analyzing code bases and looking for like high-level indications of like domain boundaries, for example. That's one where you want to kind of have that as a prompt that you could version. And so if you want to get a quick indication of, is this code base healthy? Are the domain boundaries sensible? I think you could craft a prompt there that is probably reusable across teams.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Is there one more?
Oh, one more.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can see you there.
Thanks. do you tend to like generate supporting documentation or files, whatever, to like help the context when? Because I imagine like every day you start working on a project or a colleague, anybody else pick a task. Do you have like any other generated documentation, or how do you help the context? Because switching by through models, some contexts are huge, some contexts are smaller, like depends on the model. So do you sort of re-index the project in some ways to help the LLM to understand what they are going to work on or not?
I see. So do we index the project?
Like, for instance, for my job, what we do is to ask the LLM to generate a context file that describes the project. LLM.
Oh, I see. Okay, got
for
it.
the LLM
Yeah.
itself. But I don't know if it is the best way to do it or not. Or you start from scratch every day.
I see what you mean. So I think when we first start working with a brand new code base with a customer for the first time, I think we would do a bunch of investigatory, I guess, like context for you, like prompting to get a sort of a lay of the land. So yeah, we want to understand how is the code base structured, like where are the main functionalities, what are the main user journeys through the application, what's the libraries that are being used, the tech stacks, and we'll store that away somewhere. And that's sort of the high level context, if you like. So if we have new people joining the team, they can take that prompt and they can run it, and they'll get the sort of the onboarding almost for free coming from the LLM. And the good thing about that is that as the code base changes, the prompt is obviously kind of going to reflect that. So, but of course, I mean, if you're using Cursor and Copilot, that's doing some indexing for you as well with the embeddings, so you'll get some of that for free. We've been playing with Claude Code quite a bit internally for like larger code base exploration, and having some quite good wins with that, as opposed to sort of the generation part of Claude Code, but leveraging that more for exploring larger code bases and asking it questions around like what functionality exists, or like the libraries that have been used, or like the domain structures, those kind of things. Cool. Okay, thank you.